Hello, my friends. I am back from my whirlwind trip through Utah. I took the week off to see some national parks that I had never been to before, and I am back and settled, and I'm going to be settled for the next about 6 weeks or so. So hopefully, I'll be getting some more regular content in. I have some really fantastic interviews coming up in the next few weeks. Yeah, just a lot of good questions that I've gotten that I'm going to get to. I have a list of questions that people have asked on here that I haven't gotten to yet, so I'm going to make sure I get all those answered. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say for an introduction. Um, the topic I want to talk about today is food safety, and I've gotten a couple different questions about this, and I also wanted to address it because it's something that I see come up a lot with clients. And the big concern of getting sick from your food, from pathogens that might be in your food, whether it is, bacteria or parasites or what have you. So I wanted to address this because it blocks a lot of people from doing the kind of cooking techniques and food preparation techniques that are so essential for healing and an ancestral model of nutritional healing. So I usually see three major fears come up for people. One is a fear of raw meat, fear of working with and preparing raw meat. Another one is fear of making your own ferments. Afraid that there's going to be contamination in the ferments. And the other is fear of raw dairy. So those are the three main ways that I see this manifesting for people. And so I'm going to address each of those separately. But as an overview, I just want to give some of my just general thoughts about the topic. One is that I think the major way that this fear comes about for people is actually just a greater fear of germs, right? So the people that tend to have these kinds of food safety fears tend to be people who have spent a lot of time engaging with conventional medicine. A lot of people who maybe have worked in like conventional food service businesses or food safety kind of context, like maybe they've worked in restaurants or things like that. And they have really subscribed to a germ-based model of illness. Now, I think this is complicated because, when you say, okay, the germ theory of disease isn't correct, sometimes people's heads will explode a little bit because it seems like you are. It seems like a really bizarre stance when in our conventional, medical and science, focused culture, we think that this is just kind of like a given of knowledge, right? That the germ theory of disease is correct. And it's not so much that it's completely wrong. I do think that there are pathogenic microbes and opportunistic microbes that can certainly cause disease. The issue is more how that exactly happens in the context of the body and in the immune system and in our greater ecosystem. So it's not so much that we need to throw that theory out, but we need to think of it more in a contextual systems-based framework. And this outright fear of germs that tends to happen in our overly hygienic, medical model based society is killing us. Frankly, it's making us sick because we need a lush ecosystem. We need to be exposed to germs. We need to be exposed to dirt. We need to have a constant exchange of microbes happening in our body that allows us to be resilient and robust. And so, really rethinking this idea that if we come in contact to some kind of germ or microbe, that we will immediately get sick. We need to really let that go because it's just not true. And this is where the germ theory of disease is very superficial and very short-sighted and doesn't take so many factors into account. Why will people all eat at the same restaurant, sometimes all eat the same thing, and only one person will get sick? This happens all the time, right? I hear people say this all the time, like, well, I thought it was food poisoning. Like it fits all the usual parameters I would think of in terms of symptoms of food poisoning, but my brother, he had the same thing and he didn't get sick, so maybe it wasn't food poisoning. Maybe I got a weird virus, and this happens, when we talk about colds and things like that too. Very, very common that people cohabitating, maybe one or two of the people will get an illness and the other people will seem to be spared. Now, this brings into question how accurate the germ theory of disease is, right? If people are just coming into contact with a pathogen and immediately responding, then everyone would have the exact same response to these exposures. But that's not what we see at all. We see people having very individual reactions to different pathogens, viruses, whatever have you. So there's obviously more to the story. And our immune system is incredibly intelligent. Our immune system really has more foresight than we give it credit for. And a lot of microbes actually have microbes that we would think of as bad, right? Like germs, actually have therapeutic potential. When we throw up and have diarrhea a bunch, that is a cleansing response from the body. Throwing up and having diarrhea is not actually a bad thing. It's uncomfortable, and in our culture, we really like to distance ourselves from uncomfortable things. We like to avoid pain wherever possible. But in reality, there is major physiological purpose to throwing up and having diarrhea. It empties out our system, it gives us a reset, and sometimes it's actually very important for a healing process. That is why, if you look at ancient medical systems like Ayurveda, they will actually, and they're not popular remedies nowadays, but if you look at the ancient texts, there are lots of remedies that actually stimulate vomiting and diarrhea in people for a medicinal therapeutic purpose. And honestly, I think that because we don't use those remedies as much, even something like an enema, which I'm going to do a video about that here in the next few weeks, but these kinds of cleansing therapies are really not popular anymore. And so the body has to find other ways to cleanse, and I think that it's a reasonable hypothesis that potentially people's bodies are allowing them to get food poisoning more, to have a particular reaction to a certain germ or microbe for a cleansing purpose, if the body is feeling like you need that to reset. So, just baseline, let's start rethinking how we're even looking at germs or thinking about germs or thinking about like exposure to germs as, exactly indicative of what our response is going to be. It's not that simple. To get more specific, I have clients who are really afraid to handle raw meat, who are really afraid to, contaminate their like cutting boards or knives, or to, keep meat in the fridge, for too long. And yes, certainly meat can go bad, right? But a lot of cultures have actually been eating raw meat or fermented meat for a long time with really excellent health results. And in fact, people who have some of the most compromised digestion sometimes do best eating raw meat. The raw beef diet is something that some people use for a short period of time. I don't think people should necessarily do this, for years or for their whole life. But some people do these short-term raw meat diets or fermented meat diets with really excellent results. Now, of course, there is always the chance of food poisoning when you are dealing with something like raw meat. But the reality is, if you actually look at the statistics and you look at food safety data, people get sick most often from raw vegetables, not raw meat. And so it is actually much more dangerous to eat a salad than to eat raw meat, or to, be preparing raw meat in your kitchen. Uh, if we were really going by the data, people would be much more terrified to eat a salad than to eat raw meat. And so we've really got to put this in perspective and recognize that this is actually a very normal part of a lot of traditional cultures' diets, and can in fact be used therapeutically. There's also the fear of fermentation. And so I mentioned fermented raw meat, but also we're talking about fermented dairy, fermented vegetables, all of that kind of stuff. It's extremely safe to do your own fermentation, and people again have been doing this for thousands of years. Fermented foods are a universal practice in traditional human societies, and these are societies of people who have really thrived in their health. They are live, probiotic, enzyme rich foods, and they are essential to health. Now, if you eat a fermented food and it tastes like rot, it's bad. You have deeply instinctual senses, and you will know if something is not right. You can trust that. If you take a bite of something and it tastes rotten, spit it out, you'll be fine. Your body kept you safe. A normal ferment is extremely safe, and our bodies know when something is tainted. Now, sometimes things like yeast or mold will grow on ferments. It's usually a sign you didn't use quite enough salt to help cure it. I have a whole tutorial on making sauerkraut, making your own fermented vegetables, so if you're wanting to learn how, please check that out. You can actually scoop that out. Yeah, it is totally safe to just scoop that out and then eat the rest. But if it freaks you out, throw it out and start again. Honestly, when I first started fermenting my own foods, I had that happen a lot, and now I hardly ever have it happen. And I don't actually know what I'm doing differently. There's something about just practicing a skill, and sometimes you don't even know, what you've changed in terms of how skilled you've gotten at it, but you start getting different results. So it's very normal in the beginning to have more mold or more yeast growth in your ferments that you're trying to do. You will get the hang of it. You can scrape it off. If that freaks you out, just throw it out and start over. Fermented dairy is the same thing. If it's gone bad, you will taste it. If it's become tainted with a lot of really unhelpful microbes that your body is perceiving like could cause illness that is not what you need right now, you will taste it and you will know to throw it out. Just like when milk goes bad. Like, we all know what that tastes like. Now, raw dairy is another topic. Raw dairy only started, this is how people have eaten dairy for thousands of years, right? Since we started eating dairy as adults, since we started herding and cultivating dairy producing animals. So, very normal to be eating raw dairy. It's associated with extremely healthy cultures, raw dairy intake. Mongolians, Maasai, traditional Swiss people, a lot of people all over the world. They only started pasteurizing dairy when, in the Industrial Revolution, they were moving a lot of people into cities who had been on rural farms before, and they started bringing their cows with them into cities. And these cows were being raised in these incredibly toxic, dirty environments in industrialized cities, right? Kids were dying from this milk because it was disgusting, right? There was no public hygiene standards, right? So it was a decision in an emergency situation when they had no, cleanliness regulations, and people were getting really sick because there were a lot of pathogens in the milk from these dirty environments. That is absolutely not the case anymore. We have public health standards, right? We have highly regulated farming practices. Most farms are, especially ones that are doing raw dairy, they're usually ones that really care about what they're doing, because there's so many loopholes that people have to jump through to even be able to sell raw dairy, or sometimes they have to be, kind of skirting the legal lines around it because there's so many laws in place around it. So it's always good to do your due diligence. I mean, go visit the farm, talk to them about their farming practices, see how clean it is for yourself. But a cow raised in a clean environment, raw dairy from that cow is actually going to be safer than pasteurized dairy. When you look at the illness and death rates, there are so many more people getting sick and dying from pasteurized milk than from raw milk. It is really astounding. And there are so many stories of people having major improvement in their health symptoms, including reversing their lactose intolerance, supposed lactose intolerance, right? When they start drinking raw dairy and eating raw dairy as opposed to pasteurized dairy. So again, if we let go of the germophobia, if we let go of the fear mongering, and we actually start looking at these cross-cultural realities, and we start looking at what the actual data is showing us, suddenly all these arguments really fall apart. And we need to be exposed to microbes. That is why these foods are so beneficial. This is why traditional cultures tend to eat raw meat. And fermented meat. This is why traditional cultures tend to eat fermented dairy and fermented vegetables and fermented grains and all these things in fermented form. This is why cultures that do eat dairy, who are traditional, always eat it raw. Right? There are reasons for it, and the more diversity of microbes we are exposed to, the more resilient we get. So let go of your fear in terms of food safety. Have basic good hygiene practices. Wash your cutting boards with soap. Wash your knives with soap. Keep things properly refrigerated. Trust your instincts around how things are tasting. And if it tastes off, like, your body is giving you a signal. And that's really all you need to do. So I encourage you to really try to expand your horizons around this stuff and not let your germophobia that is totally misguided stop you from engaging in these traditional practices of food preparation and consumption. So let me know if you have any follow-up questions to that, or there's anything else you want me to talk about, and I will see you all soon.